This is The Professionals, a podcast by music business technology and broadcast media technology students on Outcast OCCR Owens Community College Radio. In this series, students will interview industry professionals in their respective fields to help gather an idea of what it's like to work in their industry.
Hello, my name is Aidan Fischer, and today I am joined by Lucas Madrazo here at the Toledo School for the Arts, where he currently teaches our recording and business classes. And so we're going to talk about today about what being a professional looks like and what steps we would take as young adults or college students to get into this world of music business and what being a professional is in that sphere. So, Lucas, if you could please just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. My name is Lucas Madrazo. I'm currently the teacher here at Toledo School for the Arts. I teach Business of Arts and Communications and another class called Musical Engineering, which is essentially audio engineering, production, things of that nature. I've been teaching here for about 5 years. Previous to this, I lived in New York for about 11 years, and I worked in music management. So I worked for a small boutique music management firm servicing primarily jazz artists in New York City. And
so if I could, real quick, how do we get from working in artist management to being a teacher at a high school here in Toledo? That's really interesting.
So, I mean, it's a pretty roundabout kind of wild story. I mean, I'm from Toledo originally, so this is home for me. I grew up here. We lived in New York for a long time, my spouse and I, and towards the end of our time there, we were looking to kind of audition other cities to move to. We were, in our early 30s, and unless you're really making a lot of money, New York's not the most sustainable place to live long term.
Sure.
Because it's so expensive. It's a great place to live. I don't regret 1 minute of living there. But eventually, we were looking for something more sustainable. So we were kind of auditioning other cities to move to. We kind of tried out L.A., we tried out Nashville. We just took extended trips there, tried to kind of like feel out different things. And but then, life took a turn. Like about almost 7 years ago, my mom passed away. And it became really apparent that like a move back to my hometown to be closer to my father, be closer to my family was the right thing to do, at least for the time being. And so I moved back here. I reconnected with a lot of my old music colleagues that I've known since we were 15, and kind of started trying to feel my way around and see what direction I wanted to take. Because I was, there's not really too many opportunities to work in music management in Toledo, especially at a level where I'm like making a living. So I started teaching private lessons, 'cause I'm also a freelance musician myself, teaching private lessons, started substitute teaching at a few different schools, and I learned about Toledo School for the Arts. And I kind of just started injecting myself in the scene here and found that seemed like a place that really fit. And it's just kind of like developed from there.
So where did teaching kind of grab a hold on you? I mean, do you have any background in teaching?
No.
No.
Other than teaching private lessons. I've taught private lessons for a long time. But teaching a room full of teenagers versus teaching people one-on-one, it's a very, very different thing.
Right.
Very, very, very
I'm sure, especially
thing.
from going from like artist management, to now I have to teach high school students.
Yeah. I mean, which is essentially artist management is an office gig, right? It's like 3 of us in a room banging out emails and making phone calls all day. It's an office job.
Sure.
And it's not like it's a communications job, so it's social in that aspect, but it's not like teaching is an extremely social job. Like I have to be socially activated from 8:05 in the morning till 3 p.m.
Right. Like
nonstop. I don't have a choice. That's my gig. I have to be on. Right. And that was something that I'd never experienced before. But I kind of discovered that I was sort of maybe wired for it in a certain way.
Okay.
And it fit well. And it unlocked parts of my brain and unlocked like abilities that I didn't know that I had before.
Sure.
You know, I really honestly, I know this sounds like whatever, but like I do feel like I found a part of myself when I started doing this.
Right. And was teaching ever, when you were doing artist management in New York, was teaching, outside of private lessons something that you ever thought would become a career or be a path that you would go down?
Absolutely not.
No.
No, I mean, I don't know if I want to say absolutely not, but it wasn't my, if you would have told me when I was like, even 30 years old, that in like a few years you're going to be a high school teacher. And not only are you going to be a high school teacher, but you're going to be like very much enjoying being a high school teacher. Like I would have thought you were like on drugs or something.
Sure.
Like I wouldn't have believed it.
Right.
That was not where my brain was.
Right.
And it just kind of happened. And that's the thing, like that's what life is like. As you get older, as I'm sure you're kind of starting to experience yourself, like things unfold, and sometimes like unexpected things unfold, and sometimes you find that they are the right thing for this season of your life, and you had like you couldn't even see them coming.
Sure. So when you were my age, and I'm 19 right now, I'm about to turn 20. Mm-hmm. What did you think was kind of like going to be your plan? I mean, were you in school? What was the goal?
So I was in Boston. I was at Berklee College of Music. I was very much like performance track minded. And I was a vocal major. And I was really, really into jazz, straight ahead jazz music. And like I had this thing in my head that like I was going to move to New York and I was going to be a jazz vocalist and make a living being a jazz vocalist.
As all the up and coming musicians do.
Yeah, totally. And that was like where my head was, because I was like, this is something that I've enjoyed so much throughout my high school time. This is something that I found, this ability that I found, this like, and it was something that really like, it was like there's a spark in me about it. And I was, like very much as a lot of young people are, they're like, well, I'm passionate about this. That must mean that that's what I should do with my life, right?
Sure.
But that's not necessarily always the case, right? Like there are certain realities about that profession that I was not privy to, that I was not aware of. And that's kind of like something that you discover over time. It's like you go to a college and you get sold on a program, and they are kind of selling you on a program. They are.
Yeah,
right?
It's a business through and through.
For sure. And they're not necessarily always giving you like a realistic view of what that life looks like, right? There's the act of doing something, and then there's like the life that's built around it, right? There's the act of being on stage and being a vocalist and performing for people. That's only a really small portion of your life and a small portion of your day. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on, like managing musicians, like planning for recordings, touring. Like where does money even come into play? How does that even work? Right? How does that even work as a freelancer? How sustainable is that? How big of a market is there for jazz vocalists in the world, really,
Well, and especially in New York, when the place is flooded with talent.
There's so many jazz vocalists, and there's like, how do you even make money doing that?
Right.
Not saying that if you love that thing that you necessarily shouldn't try to do it, but like what really happened, I moved to New York, and I was like, okay, I finished school, moved to New York, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And I got an internship. A friend of mine had previously interned for this office, and I sent in my resume, and I got an interview, and I interviewed, and I got an internship position. And all of a sudden, I was working in a jazz management office, working for artists that a few of which I had idolized since I was 16. And all of a sudden, like, I had a personal relationship with them, and I was working for them. And I got like an inside view of like these people that I idolized and what their life actually looked like. And
Right.
even at like that high of a level, that high of a success level, what a hustle it still is.
Absolutely.
And even at that level, how uncertain a lot of things still are.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, this isn't the fantasy that I've had in my head or that I've been being fed, for the past however many years. And it made me think about things a lot differently. It didn't give me like a clear end game picture or anything, but it made me like realistically think about like, what does it really mean to be a working artist? And is this a life that I want?
Right.
Or do I fit in some other way?
Right. And it is not for the faint of heart.
Mm-mm.
I can attest for myself that working in the sound and entertainment industry as a sound and light engineer, that it's incredibly stressful and everything is uncertain, and I can't tell you the amount of times that I will get a call like the week of or even the day of where it's like, we need you to be here and do X, Y, and Z, and, we don't know when you're going to be done and, or no one knows anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like everyone's just making it up as we go,
Largely.
Right.
And that's the thing that's important, like as a young person coming up to like start to get in your head, is that there is no perfect thing. There is no like utopia. You never arrive, like you're constantly, like there's no point A to point B to point C to point D. It's not a straight line.
Right.
It zigzags.
Right.
Sometimes your moves are totally lateral, or sometimes, and then, but what happens, and this is an analogy that I use in my class a lot, which maybe you even remember, is that like the target, it's like when you're 18 years old, you're like, I'm gonna be this, and
Right.
and then once I accomplish that, that's it, and it's gonna be great, and okay, cool, but like that's just not how things ever unfold for hardly anybody. And what you start to learn after a while is that end game, that target, it's always moving.
Right.
And it changes as your life changes, as your priorities change. My priorities right now as a 38-year-old person are not the same as they were when I was 22.
Sure.
They're totally different. And it's okay that they're different, and I feel good about them being different,
Right.
I think that you get this idea that you get older and you just like settle for something, but that's not how it feels, and that's like not how it goes, really, at least
Sure.
in my experience. It's just that you just change as a person, you evolve and you grow, and you look at the world differently, and you look at your own life and what you want differently.
Right.
And that's okay. It's more than okay. It's actually good to do that.
Right. So one thing that I kind of wanted to ask about is, what does being a professional, look like to you? When you were working back in artist management, you said you did that for 11 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? What does being a professional, look like in that sense? And would you see yourself now as like a professional teacher, right? Even if it's not something that you had gone to school for or something that you have been doing in a classroom for a very long time,
Mm-hmm.
what does being a professional mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of different things. It's how reliable you are, how competent you are at whatever material you're dealing with in whatever profession. Like competent, reliable, easy to be around, right? Collaborative, all of these things. And, like when I reached like the end of my journey with music management, like I was like feeling pretty good about my abilities. Like I had strengths and weaknesses like everybody. But I saw how my abilities had evolved, right? And teaching is kind of like the same thing, right? It's an interesting thing to start delving into a whole new skill set when you're like 33 years old. And I'm sure it's even crazier when you're 43 or 53. Because 33 is still pretty young. But, and now I'm 5 years in, like, I mean, it definitely, like, the first year or two, I definitely, like, felt like I was still getting my sea legs.
Right.
Right. And not necessarily in terms of, like, the content that I was teaching or talking about, but just in, like, all of the other aspects of the job. Like having my scene together in terms of classroom management, in terms of, like, how organized I was with, like, assignments and grading, like how I managed a classroom from like just like keeping order and keeping focus, and also like from a disciplinary perspective as well. Like that's not really like my strong suit. Like disciplinarian is not really my strong suit.
Well, and I don't think it's something that you can like even teach.
No, no, it's not. I mean, they do. Like if you go to school for education, there are strategies around that, right? And some people have more of a background in that. And then you have people like, I mean, for example, another teacher that teaches here, like Jay Wellens, who has been he was like a guru to me that first year.
Yeah.
Gave me so much like sage advice about teaching. Totally non-judgmental sage advice, because he knew I was just starting out.
Absolutely.
And somebody like him who's like this like grizzled veteran who's like seen literally everything, experienced every single thing. He's seen successes. He's seen failures. He's seen kids drop out. He's lost students before, students who have passed away in the middle of a school year for whatever reason. Like he's literally experienced everything in the entire scope that an educator can experience. And and like, so somebody like that has like a different type of posture when they operate. And, and I feel like I'm still, like I'm not as shakeable as I was that first year, but I definitely, every year that passes, I still feel like I'm developing my posture more and more, and I know that I still have a road ahead of me as well.
Sure. So we had already established that teaching is not something that you saw yourself doing as a career. But do you think this is something that you're like really going to stick hard to for the foreseeable future? I
mean, that's how it feels right now. I'm like very content and happy in this job. And I feel like it lends itself to like skill sets that I always possessed, but I didn't necessarily like recognize, like my ability to convey information is something that I've kind of always done, with like just like friends and people that I've known and maybe private students and whatever. But I never like thought of that as a skill set. I just kind of thought it was how I am,
Yeah.
And now like recognizing that as like an actual ability and like a skill set that has like a use, like a real definite use. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that I found that thing that fits like that.
Sure. And how does that, the like skills that you have learned in real life, obviously those some of those will translate to the classroom as skills, but what have you learned about skills that you can use outside of the classroom from like maybe your students or your fellow teachers?
I mean, it carries over into everything, right? It carries over into like my social interactions. It carries over into my worldview. It carries over into like how I organize and conduct rehearsals when I'm a musician. I mean, I think that most prevalently is the really like the worldview part of it. Like how I think about society, how I think about issues and the direction that we're going. I'm seeing like the next generation of like responsible citizens coming up. And it's like I almost feel like I have like this little time machine window into the future sometimes. That's like kind of how I think about it.
And even like outside of seeing it, is like you have a direct effect on it. You have your hand on these on the kids growing up into being adults.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think that I don't like really think about that enough maybe. Is that like, cuz I remember I remember how some of my teachers affected me.
Yeah.
Like I had a handful that like really, really affected my worldview and my trajectory. They had a hand in it. They had influence in it.
Absolutely.
For the better.
I think that, everybody can think of, some teacher or, mentor that, either in a good or a bad way had some kind of effect on them. I think those kinds of things, when you're seeing someone, maybe 7-8 hours a day for 180 days out of the year, 8 years in a row.
You form a really strong bond with some people.
Right.
Yeah.
Talking about like, Jay Wellens earlier, he was here at TSA, he's the band and orchestra director. And me being a trumpet player, I have known him since 6th grade, since I was 11 years old.
Yeah.
Right. And I have a very good connection and a great relationship with him. And that is something.
Think about that. You're 19, you're almost 20.
Right.
Like that's almost a decade.
Yeah.
Right. And like the effect he had on your life is still rippling.
Absolutely.
And just as like some teachers that I had when I was that age, that their effect still ripples into me sometimes. Or I hear some of them come out when I'm talking to my students.
Sure.
Right? That's always a trip when like something comes out where I was just like, oh my God, that teacher used to say that same thing to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like that's my hope, is that I can affect some people that way. Like I know that you're not going to connect with every single student. Not every single student is going to take that from you. That's just reality. I mean, I have 120 new people every year.
Sure.
But I don't know if I can like have my hand in like, that's kind of like what you leave behind. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like your
what's
positive,
my legacy?
Well, your positive footprint on like, just like the world.
Yeah.
Like, are you giving to it or are you taking from it? Right? Some people only take from the world. Some people only take energy from other people.
Sure.
So there's a lot of people like that. But like I'd never wanted to be one of those people. Like I always wanted to push outwards, like try to give of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that's what I'm doing.
Sure. So, what are some things then? It sounds like you love teaching and is something that's really meaningful to you. What are some things, like the cons about teaching? What are some things that you don't like about this job? Or some things that you would, if you could have your cake and eat it too, what would you have differently?
Well, I mean, some of the things that I don't like are the things that are hard. I don't know that are necessarily things that you could change about the profession. I mean, there's certain things like grading, like the way that we assess students. I honestly don't really give a shit about grades. Like I don't think about them very much. I do them because I have to do them, and we're teachers. We have to measure things, right? But I don't necessarily think I don't judge any student based on that. I wasn't the best student. I didn't always have the best grades, and I don't think that means as much as there's too much stock put in it, kind of. So all of that bureaucratic administrative stuff, I'm just kind of whatever. I do it because I have to do it because it's part of the gig. I think about that differently than like conveying information. Now, it is helpful to let me know if I'm conveying information well.
Sure.
You know, if I'm not conveying information well, you can kind of see that in the grades sometimes, and then I'll realize that and try and recalibrate, you know,
right.
in a way. So there's that. So they do have some use, I guess. The other thing that I can't say that I like, but I think it's important. Well, it's not that I don't. You know, it's just hard. There are parts of the job that you take home with you sometimes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the people you teach you're teaching a bunch of humans who have all like a whole life outside of your classroom, and people are complicated and people have problems, and sometimes
Absolutely.
people have big problems, and sometimes they bring those problems to you, because whatever, you're an authority figure, or they trust you,
or they see you every day of the week.
They see you every day of the week,
half a year,
right? And sometimes it's really heavy. And sometimes it's really heavy and there's not necessarily something that you can directly do about it.
Right.
You just have to let somebody else know. Like you have to let the counselor know or something like that. And, and it's like, because it's hard, because it's like you feel the heaviness, you feel the emotional heaviness. You have the care for these people. But at the end of the day, you're not their parent.
Right.
And you're not their family. Right. And you do have to have your own life. I have my own family. I have a father, I have a brother, I have a wife, who have to hold that place of priority in my life, as everybody should, There has to be that separation, but sometimes you feel it bleed over because you do care about your students on a very deep, I know I do, on a very deep level. And sometimes it's really hard not to, you can't just leave it here. It follows you, it comes home with you, right. And you think about it and you ponder it. And, and sometimes you second guess yourself. Did I say the right thing? Did I do as much as I could have to help?
Sure.
Did I give them a good piece of advice? I don't, and there's not always like a totally
like a
definite
right
answer.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That can be hard. But like that emotional labor is also part of what makes it such an important and kind of beautiful profession too, because it is very much part of the job.
Right. Well, and it probably helps too that you're a good communicator, and good at getting your point across. So while we were talking about education, or I'm trying to remember what it was that you had said, but one of the things that I had wanted to ask was, we were talking about putting an emphasis on education and grades, right? I think as a college student, and even as a, when I was a senior in high school, that there is this incredible emphasis on going to college. You need to go to college, you need to get your degree so that you can get a job and have a career, right? As, as a college graduate, how strongly do you feel, about like that your degree had helped you to get to where you are now?
It set me on a trajectory and a path. It took me to places where I learned certain things and led me in specific directions. But directly, my degree did not have an effect on this. Like your degree has an effect if you become a doctor, or you become a lawyer, or you become a social worker, or whatever. There's some professions where it's essential. You just have to. That's the only way there. That has not been my trajectory. Like getting an internship at the place that I got an internship, they didn't look at my degree. That wasn't why I got hired. That might have been part of it. They're like, oh, he went to Berklee College of Music. Blah, blah, blah.
But your degree is in performance, isn't it?
It was kind of like a mixed degree.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a hybrid degree. But, it just really depends what you want to do. And here's the other thing, too, where it's like my philosophy on that has, like, really changed. As, like, a millennial growing up, and especially, like, I went to I had a pretty privileged, like, growing up. I had a pretty privileged situation. I went to Maumee Valley. Like I went to a good school. I went to an expensive school. They have very good educational outcomes. Most of the kids go out of state to different colleges and this and that and whatever. There's resources, And we were very much like fed this philosophy that's what you have to do to get ahead in this life. But, and that was kind of also the time period a little bit too, right? But then you have all these people going into student debt and like heavy debt.
Absolutely.
Getting these like $30,000 a year jobs or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden the whole business model kind of tilts on its head. So you have these people going into like heavy student debt for these like low paying jobs. And then maybe you have somebody who like becomes a welder and like has no student debt and is making like $80K a year and living like a nice life. And all of a sudden I was just like, well, okay, what does this all mean then? Right?
I think, as a college student, especially at Owens, I kind of have a different kind of mindset about it, where, so just while we were on the topic of, college education and whatnot, I see a lot of like my peers, or my fellow classmates, like when we talk about transferring and whatnot, like what are the plans for after Owens, when I had sent my applications into like BG or UT, going through just like the math and, how much I put into it and what I get out of it, it's a lot of money. Just thinking about BG alone, it was like going to be like probably close to $100,000 for, my 4-year tenure there. Yeah. And I think UT may be closer to 50, but, the same kind of thing, right? I'm in my 4th semester at Owens, and this is when most people would be finishing up, but I haven't even scratched like, a fraction of what I would be at a normal university. So it's just, I think the whole like premise behind you have to go to a 4-year school and you have to get your bachelor's degree, to start a career and be successful. I think that kind of mindset and that kind of idea has really shifted, and like just the value of the college, degree, I think has really changed.
Well, the economy's changed, right? The world has changed. The cost of wages have stagnated for a very long time, and the cost of education has continued to rise at a very rapid pace. So, of course, you're going to recalibrate and think about things differently. There's no way not to, right? And it's become really apparent to me. Like I said, when I grew up in this kind of like very privileged little bubble. And then teaching here, all of a sudden I'm teaching students that come from a very various economic backgrounds, right? And that has really shifted my perspective a lot, because I think when I was 17 or 18, I just took it for granted that anybody could just go to college wherever they wanted, because that's who I was surrounded by.
Well, I think like lots of people, maybe kind of have that mindset. Yeah. But I think it's a, when you're 17, 18, you're naive and you don't really have like a great understanding of what the real working world looks like. The broader
world.
Right.
And what I've really realized over the years, and especially since coming to teach here, there are so many different ways to walk the path. And success looks different for every individual person. There are a lot of different ways to get to a destination. It's not, there's not any one prescribed path.
Right.
And sometimes you really have to think outside of the box. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're, let's talk about the prescribed path just, really quick. As a teacher, right, I know a lot of teachers, you have to get like a license and you have to do X, Y, and Z, with the state and pass all these tests to be a teacher and whatnot. What, are you, like attending school or like attending lectures or,
I was, I had to attend classes to get my licensure. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate that the school paid for those classes. And also we're required to do professional development every so often. We need like a certain number of hours a year, to stay up to code. Mm-hmm. So like that is constantly happening too. Educational methods, diversity, equity, and inclusion training, just like different things of that nature.
And that's just like a kind of routine thing that comes along with the job of being a teacher.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And then so my last question, the last thing that I wanted to talk about, what kind of advice would you have given to your younger self, as a 17, 18, naive, young adult, like looking at the world, what kind of advice would you have given to yourself? In the sense of a career path, or what I'm going to do with my life. Because I think that's something that a lot of people my age, or maybe just slightly younger than me or even older than me struggle with.
Sure.
Is I'm doing this, but, what's my career path,
I think that there's like elements of that, like that naivete that I'm thankful for in a way, that I was very fortunate. I consider myself fortunate that like there was never a financial struggle around it. So I was given the room to kind of like dream a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm very fortunate, very privileged for that. But I do think that it would have been beneficial to potentially have had some people talking to me about more practical stuff. Nobody ever talked to me about money. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever talked to me about saving. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever talked to me about investing. Nobody ever taught me those things, ever. They just weren't in the realm of like what was covered by anything. And then or taxes, or like any of that practical stuff that every single person has to deal with in being an adult, which is like funny because that's what I teach largely here.
Yeah.
Like so much of the stuff that I teach here in that class, I literally teach it because I wish that somebody would have taught it to me. Like for real.
Right.
Like that is a big part of like a lot of the design of my curriculum is like material that I wish that I would have been taught. That would have been useful. And I'm fine, I'm doing okay, but like that would have been great to get some of that like practical, little bit of that practical approach in not like a non-stern, non-scary way, just kind of like introducing these concepts.
So how would you recommend then that, the people go out and look for those kinds of things? Where would you recommend to look?
I mean, I think this is like, coming from a practical level, like if it is not provided to you during high school, if you can seek out in college just basic understanding of money, basic understanding of just like those like, because there's classes on that stuff, mm-hmm. right? Financial literacy classes and just like practical things about being an adult that every adult has to do. Because you go through school and you get this degree potentially or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's just like, poof, you're kicked out of the door, and then you're just like, okay.
Hey, here's the rest of the world.
Now I got to do it. And there's like a lot of tools that like you may or may not have. A lot of tools that I didn't have, that like I would have potentially made different decisions. I don't regret any of my decisions, but like I could have been doing a few more things to help myself along the way.
Sure.
It's that kind of stuff.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you very much, Lucas, for joining me and for having me in this space today. Also, thank you to TSA for providing this space and letting me use it to host this interview. So once again, my name is Aidan Fischer, talking to Lucas Madrazo. And just thank everybody for listening.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, bye.
This has been the Professionals Podcast by Music Business Technology and Broadcast Media Technology students. Join us next time on Outcast OCCR, Owens Community College Radio.